In the busy streets of New York, a comic book artist named Josh is out for lunch with a friend. They chat about Spider-Man until Josh notices a young woman he had seen once before. Gathering courage, he follows her, introduces himself, and asks her out. At first, the woman refuses, not comfortable accepting an invitation from a stranger. However, Josh tries to break the ice respectfully, and slowly, she begins to warm up to him. While they are walking, the young woman suddenly becomes weak and collapses. She has diabetes. Josh quickly helps her and promises to stay by her side. Nearby, an unknown man inside a limousine sees the situation and calls an ambulance. Minutes later, the ambulance arrives and takes the woman away. Before leaving, she finally tells Josh her name, Cheryl. Josh wants to accompany her, but the medical staff won't allow it. So he promises to visit her at the hospital after work. Later, Josh returns to his job, Marvel Comics. After finishing his work, he asks Stan Lee if he can leave early to visit his new friend. Stan allows it, and Josh heads to the hospital with flowers. However, when he asks for Cheryl, the staff tells him there is no patient by that name. Confused, he checks another hospital, but they also have no record of her. Since he never learned her last name, things become even more complicated. Meanwhile, Cheryl has actually been taken to a secret laboratory where a mysterious doctor experiments on kidnapped diabetic victims. Cheryl screams for help, but she is restrained. Back in the city, Josh goes to the police station and reports everything to Lieutenant Frank, a tough officer who doesn't care much for comic books. Josh gives him a sketch of Cheryl and the ambulance, but without Cheryl's last name, the case goes nowhere. As Josh leaves, Officer Sandra approaches him privately and promises to help if he can find more evidence. The next day, Josh calls every hospital but still finds no trace of Cheryl. He becomes stressed, affecting his work. Stanley warns him that he must finish the new superhero project, Dr. Strong, or risk losing a major career opportunity. During his breaks, Josh searches the city, posting flyers of Cheryl. Eventually, he finds her roommate, who is also diabetic. When she checks her voicemail, she hears Cheryl begging for help. The roommate takes Josh to the horse stable where Cheryl works at night, hoping she is there. But instead, the same ambulance arrives, kidnaps the roommate, and drives off. Josh barely avoids being run over. He tries calling Lieutenant Frank again, but gets no response. The next morning, Josh suddenly becomes extremely sick after drinking milk. Afraid of the same ambulance, he refuses medical help, but medics forcefully take him anyway. At the hospital, Josh panics and tries to escape, but Frank finally appears to calm him down. However, since Josh's story still lacks evidence, the police now consider him a possible suspect in the disappearances. Josh is placed in a hospital bed where he meets his roommate Elias, an elderly former investigative journalist who has lived there for years. Elias overheard everything and initially suspects Josh is guilty. Their conversation is interrupted when the supervisor gives Josh a sedative. Late that night, fake medical staff arrive, the same kidnappers disguised as nurses and a policeman. They knock out the supervisor and attempt to abduct Josh. Elias notices and triggers the fire alarm, causing chaos. The kidnappers flee, and Elias hides Josh back in the room. A nurse later announces that the supervisor is missing, and her insulin was left behind. Josh realizes a pattern. All victims, including Cheryl and her roommate, are diabetic. Seeing the truth, Elias decides to help Josh solve the case, believing this could be the biggest story of his career. They disguise themselves and sneak out of the hospital, then travel to the New York Post to research diabetic disappearances. Outside, they find the suspicious ambulance parked. Elias tries to take photos, but his camera malfunctions. Josh calls Lieutenant Frank to report the location while Elias fixes the camera and photographs the ambulance. Suddenly, the kidnappers appear. Elias throws the camera film into the river to protect the evidence, but the kidnappers knock him unconscious and take him. Josh returns, finds Elias missing, and realizes he was kidnapped too. Meanwhile, Frank arrives, spots the ambulance, and chases it. He forces it to stop, opens the back doors, and is stabbed by one of the fake nurses. The ambulance then runs him over and drives away, taking his body. Josh returns to Marvel, where Officer Sandra arrives. She tells him that Frank has gone missing. Josh believes the kidnappers captured him too. Sandra calls for information on the ambulance and is told it may be traced to a junkyard in the city. The next morning, Josh visits the junkyard and obtains a list of vehicle records. From this, he finds the license plate and address connected to the suspicious ambulance. He calls Officer Sandra from a payphone and gives her the details. She promises to verify the information. However, as soon as Josh leaves the phone booth, he's surrounded by a gang of street thugs. He tries to defend himself, but he's outnumbered and beaten unconscious. Hours later, Josh wakes up injured, just as the same ambulance arrives to take him. He tries to resist, but he's too weak, and the fake nurses strap him onto a stretcher. Suddenly, the gang returns and starts harassing the ambulance crew. Josh provokes them further by hinting that the ambulance may be carrying valuable medicine. The thugs attack, but the nurses turn out to be extremely strong and beat all of them. Josh's distraction fails, and he is taken away. Inside the ambulance, a suitcase next to him falls over. Even tied down, Josh manages to pull it closer with his foot and uses his mouth to search inside. He only finds a jacket labeled vent. With no other option, Josh forces the stretcher against the back doors. After several attempts, the doors burst open. When the ambulance drives uphill, he slides out, still strapped to the stretcher. He speeds down the street, narrowly avoiding cars. Eventually, he crashes into garbage cans, which breaks the restraints, allowing him to escape. The nurses chase him. Josh runs into a factory and begs a worker for help, but moments later, the nurses follow and kill the worker. Josh escapes into narrow metal tunnels, where one of the nurses crawls after him. Thanks to the tight space, Josh fights back and manages to shove his way through an iron railing, falling onto the street below and narrowly avoiding traffic again. He continues running until he reaches a park, where police are already investigating another recent victim. Desperate, Josh calls for help. Detectives Mosey and Ryan believe he may be a witness and take him to the station. Josh explains about the kidnappings, but the detectives push him for information about the park case instead. Sandra arrives and tells everyone that 11 diabetic individuals have disappeared recently, likely connected to the ambulance. Josh mentions the vent jacket. Sandra promises to follow up, while Josh remains detained. Meanwhile, in the hidden laboratory, the mad doctor keeps Elias restrained. Elias demands to know his purpose. The doctor explains that he is restricted by medicine's ethical limits, so he experiments on diabetic patients secretly to profit from his research. Elias protests that he isn't diabetic. The doctor responds that he will use Elias to publicly prove his achievements once the time comes, then injects him with a painful experimental substance. Meanwhile, Sandra continues researching and accidentally spills coffee on case files. While cleaning the mess, she notices that Vent refers not to a person, but a nightclub named Vintage. She goes there and finds the ambulance parked inside the club. She calls the police station for backup, but Detective Mosey dismisses her and hangs up. Josh convinces the detectives to go anyway by telling them the same ambulance nurses killed the woman in the park. At the nightclub, Sandra tries to blend in, but two men bother her. She knocks one out and then demands attention by firing several shots in the air, revealing she is a police officer. Shortly after, the detectives arrive with Josh. Suddenly, the doctor bursts through the club driving the ambulance, smashing through the crowd and destroying everything. Josh narrowly avoids being run over. Police surround him, but the doctor escapes by crashing through a wall and fleeing. Sandra, Josh, and the detectives search the club's second floor. There, they discover the doctor's laboratory, dozens of hospital beds, and victims surrounded by medical equipment. Several armed nurses attack, but the officers take them down. Among the patients, Josh finally finds Cheryl, alive but weak. She explains that the doctor injected her with a chemical, but her body rejected it, leaving her close to death. Josh reassures her that real doctors will now help her. Cheryl thanks him, and then heartbreakingly asks him to call her boyfriend and tell him she's safe. Josh is devastated to learn she was already in a relationship, but still agrees. Sandra notices Josh's disappointment and tries to comfort him, revealing her own feelings. But before they can talk, one of the disguised ambulance crew ambushes Sandra. She fights back, and at the same moment, Elias appears and knocks the man out. Josh is relieved to see his friend alive. Josh and Sandra leave the detectives to wrap up the operation. That night, they decide to relax and take a limousine to Josh's apartment. On the way, Josh and Sandra grow closer. However, Josh's keys were lost during the attack, and suddenly, the doctor's ambulance reappears, slamming into them. Sandra is knocked unconscious. Josh escapes into an alley, but the doctor follows and crashes into a dumpster, throwing Josh onto the hood. The doctor reaches through the windshield to attack him, but Josh breaks free and runs. Josh climbs a tall fence and ends up near a large construction pit. The doctor, unaware of what is on the other side, threatens Josh through the ambulance microphone. Josh taunts him into charging forward. The doctor accelerates, smashes through the fence, and drives straight into the deep pit, where the ambulance explodes in a fiery crash. The nightmare is finally over. A real ambulance arrives. Josh is placed on a stretcher beside Sandra, who is injured but alive. The two try to kiss, but the stretcher restraints keep them just out of reach, ending the night with a bittersweet smile. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.